Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is the third webinar in our 6-part series on brain injury and behavioral health. My name is Lenny Hawley. I work at Craig Hospital in Englewood, Colorado. This series is brought to you by Craig Hospital with funding from a grant from MINDSOURCE Brain Injury Network. The topic for today is adapting psychotherapy for individuals living with moderate to severe brain injury and their families. And we'll be talking about adults today rather than children. Each of our webinars is being recorded and will be available on the webinar webpage. I also want to let you know that if you attended Dr. Arsenagas's presentation last month, we said that we would send out his slides, and we're having a little difficulty doing that through the Zoom system, and we'll get those to you soon. Okay, it's not advancing. There. This link listed on the page here is a link that will take you to a survey you can complete to download education credit certificate. Don't worry, we're also going to email you this link so you don't need to write it down. This webinar series is targeted toward an audience of behavioral health providers working in the community. Our objective today is that hopefully participants should be better able to describe some of the evidence-based research regarding psychotherapy for adult individuals with moderate and severe TBI. Also to be able to define strategies for how to adapt their therapy and identify some general therapeutic principles. I have no financial relationships to disclose that are related to the presentation. It's estimated that 2.5 million people sustain a brain injury annually, a traumatic brain injury in the United States. Those at the greatest risk are small children, teenagers, and aging adults, and the majority of those injured are males. Although 75% of those injuries are categorized as mild TBI, an estimated 5.3 million Americans are currently living with chronic TBI disabilities. That classification of mild, moderate, and severe is defined by factors such as the length of loss of consciousness, post-traumatic amnesia, and Glasgow-Coma scale score at the time of injury. For those individuals classified with mild injury, there's usually no inpatient brain injury rehabilitation required. And for most of those individuals, most sequelae will resolve within a matter of months. Dr. Lisa Brenner will be talking more about mild brain injury in February on that webinar. For those classified with moderate to severe injury, there usually is some level of inpatient rehab required, and the sequelae that they deal with may be chronic and may last a lifetime. Some of those challenges that they face can really be in any aspect of their life. And many of them are things that seem invisible to people, that are difficult to see. When something's difficult to see, it can be more difficult to understand or accept. They can include things such as changes in how they move their body, their awareness of their body in space, coordination and balance, changes in sensory functioning, such as a visual field deficit, or hypersensitivity to touch, or changes in sense of taste or smell. There can also be significant changes in cognition, from the very basic underlying skills of attention and focus and concentration to more complex skills such as memory and new learning, and executive skills like judgment, mental flexibility, being able to switch from one task to another, problem solving, and being able to learn from mistakes that they've made. And even their endurance, their cognitive endurance, feeling cognitively fatigued or feeling brain fatigued, and having difficulty with self-awareness. There can also be changes in how a person communicates, being able to find the words that they want or put the words together to express themselves, to understand what other people are saying to them, to move their mouth and tongue to form the words, to be able to follow group conversations, understand when it's their turn to jump in, being able to get to the point and be concise or not getting lost in a conversation, and being able to initiate conversations with other people. Dr. Arsenagas is going to talk more about cognition specifically next month. And then there are changes in a person's emotional regulation and regulating their behavior, being able to inhibit things and regulate things like sadness or anger, having a flat affect, not being able to show their emotions, feeling easily overwhelmed by their emotions or having a low tolerance for stress, and seeming to be self-focused, turned inward, not really being able to think about the needs of other people or asking other people how they're doing. Showing low initiation and having changes in social behaviors, how they interact, read social cues, or crossing social boundaries, not following social rules. All of these changes in all areas can lead to long-term psychosocial challenges for not only for the person, but also for their family. Having difficulty going back to work, especially going back to the kind of work they did before that was meaningful and important to them. Being able to go back to school, being able to drive, which is such a complex skill. And if you're not able to drive, you're not able to as easily get out and be around people and be involved in the community. Having changes in social relationships, feeling lonely and socially isolated, that can lead to changes in a person's relationships at home, their marriage, their parenting, changes in the roles that people play in the family. Perhaps the person with the injury was the major breadwinner, or was the person who took care of the children, or was the person that dealt with the finances, and now someone else needs to do that. Being able to maintain friendships that they had before, or being able to make new friendships, and changes in how they just manage their life, being able to pay the bills on time, to follow a schedule, to show up for appointments, just that sense of independence. And changes in a person's sense of purpose in life. What's the meaning of my life? Where do I belong? How do I fit in? Who am I? So I think if you put yourself in the place of a person living with brain injury and you think about that multitude of challenges that they can face, the neurological changes, changes in how you think or communicate, cognitive fatigue, sensory changes. If you think about those changes combined with the adjustment in psychosocial issues, financial stress, loneliness, role changes, and then think about any pre-injury mental health issues that the person may have been dealing with, depression, anxiety, substance use disorder. Those three areas together can come to make behavioral health issues post-brain injury. The challenges that people face can range from changes in their behavior, increased psychosocial stressors, decreased psychological well-being, and being at risk for new behavioral health disorders, such as especially depression and anxiety. Almost half of adults with no pre-injury history of mental health problems develop a new mental health problem after traumatic brain injury. Almost half. And that's only the people we know about. Depression is the most common, and 60 to 70% of those who are dealing with depression also have coexisting anxiety. Both of those usually appear in the first year after brain injury as a person starts to go back and live their life, and the risk remains for decades. The rates of depression, it should be noted, are lower for those with severe injuries, and that's related to self-awareness, not being as aware of some of the changes and the impact of the injury on a person's life. Suicidal ideation can be 7 times higher after brain injury, and that risk persists for years. And even with the high rates of psychological distress after TBI, there's a very low percentage of people that are living with chronic TBI deficits that are actually receiving counseling or psychotherapy. Sanders and colleagues in a recent study looking at psychological distress screened 836 people for their study, and only 24 of those were currently receiving counseling or psychotherapy services. So you're a behavioral health therapist working in the community. Someone comes to your clinic or your office looking for behavioral health services, and they have a history of traumatic brain injury. How can you adapt your therapy to be the most helpful to this person? Well, today I'm going to talk about some general principles to keep in mind. I'm going to talk about some strategies that you can apply that I find helpful in my work. And I'll go over some examples of evidence-based therapies that you may be very familiar with that can be adapted for people with brain injury. I'll also talk about 2 composite case studies where we can take some of those strategies and principles and see how you could actually put them into play. And then I'm going to go over some resources that may be helpful to you as well as to the patient that you work with. One thing to keep in mind is that as you adapt treatment for the person living with brain injury, just know that some of the things that are very familiar to you as a behavioral health counselor, the things that you are good at, that you do every day, can be adapted. Things like the use of therapeutic alliance and engagement, helping people develop insight and improve their self-awareness. For some people with very severe injuries, that may be limited, but there's still possibilities for growth. Using cognitive behavioral strategies, using mindfulness and relaxation exercises, helping people set new realistic goals for themselves that are attainable and lead to success, and helping people regain that existential meaning in life. So here are, I think, 8 principles that are evidence-based to keep in mind. The first is to understand the person. And of course, you would do that with any patient that you see. But with the person coming to your office who has a history of brain injury, it's important to look at who they were before the injury, as well as who they are now. What were their goals? What were their skills, their dreams and aspirations? What was their personality like? And then to understand the injury itself. Dr. Spear and Dr. Arsenegas in the earlier webinars talked about neuroanatomy and how that relates to behavioral health disorders. And then understanding who the person is today, of course. It's important, secondly, to involve the family and friends and other loved ones, people who really know this person. And that's really for 2 reasons. One is, as a historian, you may find that the person with severe brain injury may not have an accurate history of their past. They may not be able to describe to you some of the issues they were dealing with. They may really not have any information about the injury itself, but a family member or close friend may be able to be helpful with that. They also can be helpful with carrying over what you're working on in treatment into day-to-day life and helping give reminders to that person as to what their goals are and what they're working on. Third, provide education and resources for the client and the family. When people go through brain injury rehabilitation, they're given a lot of information about the injury, about resources, but there's so much going on during that time. At first, the healthcare providers are trying to just save their life and then trying to teach them every basic function from walking and talking and learning to speak again. And sometimes those educational resources, packets of information get lost along the way. So making sure that they're connected with the education and resources that they need. Fourth, emphasize normalcy. Let people know that some of the issues they're dealing with, they're not alone. Other people have dealt with these issues following brain injury. This is something that occurs. These are normal things people can expect after a brain injury, and that you're there to help them through it. Help people enhance their self-awareness and help them find ways to monitor themselves, to give themselves constant feedback on how they're doing, whether it's monitoring their agitation, monitoring their emotions, whatever it is that they're working on in treatment. Help people develop new short-term realistic goals and work on that together. I think one thing that can be difficult for people living with brain injury is the feeling of hanging on to the goals that they had before the injury, wanting to still meet those goals because, of course, those are the goals they may have had for a long time. Being able to let go of some of those goals that may not be as successful for them anymore and be able to develop new goals that can provide them with success and maybe short term so that they can see immediate results. Help people build on strengths. Sometimes after a catastrophic injury, people have told me, I really don't have any strengths. It's hard to recognize what their strengths are. Helping them rediscover those strengths and realize the things that they can build on, but also helping them find ways to compensate, to use compensatory strategies to compensate for their challenges. And continue to help people foster a sense of realistic hope and meaning in life. So on the next 3 slides, I'm going to give you some specific strategies that I've found helpful. The first is to always remember to set the context. Help orient the person, even in just simple ways, just reminding them that you first met 3 weeks ago, you're meeting today to work on these things, and what you'll be doing in the future. Just little reminders to orient them as to who you are, what they're doing here, and what your purpose is. Monitor your environment. Are the lights in the room too bright? Are there distractions outside the window that might not be distracting to another patient, but might be to someone living with a brain injury? What about the time of day? I know a number of people living with brain injury who will say, I don't go anywhere after 2 o'clock. I never make an appointment, have anything that where I have to really think or pay attention in the late afternoon or evening, that they may have a time of day that's best for them. Remember to assess for pain and sleep. Those are common problems after brain injury. Encourage pacing and breaks. We all live a very fast-paced life today. We multitask. We might walk down the street talking on our phone and eating a sandwich at the same time as we're trying to find our way somewhere. We get used to that multitasking, fast-paced life. After a brain injury, a person may need to know that it's okay. And in fact, it's actually a good thing to slow down that pace, to set a new pace to their life, to set breaks during their day, to find ways to close their eyes for a few minutes in between tasks or in between appointments, to not put too many things into their day, that they'll actually be more successful that way. Provide feedback that's concrete. Sometimes subtle feedback may go past somebody. It may be more difficult to pick up. You may need to give more concrete feedback than you would with another type of client. Letting people know that what they did just then or the behavior that they just displayed is exactly what they're working on, reminding them of those things. Audio and video feedback have also been shown to be successful in working with people living with brain injury. Videotaping an interaction or role play, or just videotaping the person early on in your treatment so that you can show them their progress as time goes by. And using redirection or changing the topic when a person seems overwhelmed or flustered or just has too many emotions. Encourage the use of compensatory devices. Sometimes I think of it as, you've got your computer and it's full of information and you might need to get an external hard drive. There's just not enough room. Cognition and emotion are really intertwined. And if a person has too much information, isn't able to keep track of things, is missing appointments or forgetting things, it can affect their psychological well-being and their self-esteem. So helping people find ways to compensate for that, whether that's a notebook that they keeping things on their smartphone, whatever makes sense to that person. What works for one person may not work at all for another. I know people who use a whiteboard in different rooms in their house. Some people have a bulletin board right as they walk out the door where they can have a list of things they need to do before they leave, or a wall calendar in their kitchen. There are also some very cool TBI-specific apps that you can put on a phone that help with memory, organization, time management, and even managing your fatigue. But even if you're really good at taking notes and writing down information, recording information, it doesn't do any good unless you go back and look at it and review it. So encourage your client to have a time each day, just a set time, just like brushing their teeth, where they sit down, go over their notes, look back over their day, look ahead to the day, the next day coming up, or review any recordings that they've made. And then to have a set time each week to review what's happened in the week behind them and what do they plan to do in the week ahead. Teach active listening skills. We could all listen better. I know my husband thinks I probably could. Active listening skills are great for everyone. And that whole concept of being able to show that you're listening, having direct eye contact, nodding your head, repeating back what someone said, and then confirming that they understood is especially helpful after brain injury when someone needs more help in staying focused and remembering information. I'm just going to check these questions. It looks like we have 2 questions here. And I'll get to those at the end. Okay. And use homework. Homework is a great strategy you may use with other clients who are not living with brain injury, but especially helpful for people living with a brain injury. And I find it especially helpful to use homework that involves both the individual and the family so that they can work together, give each other feedback, remind each other about homework tasks. Also help people practice assertive communication. I think that after a brain injury, people are often in a situation where they need to communicate their needs. They need to let people know what their wishes are and need to make sure that they're heard. They need to advocate for themselves. And learning to be assertive in your communication rather than passive aggressive can really be helpful in helping get those needs met. Encourage looking outward. Sometimes families will say to me that, well, he just thinks about himself all the time. He's always talking about himself and not thinking about me. Encouraging the skills of asking a family member, maybe at least once a day, how are you doing or how was your day? Showing that outward expression that can start a conversation going and can improve a relationship. And then remembering to summarize sessions at the end to help remind the person, you came in today feeling this way, you mentioned this, we talked about this, and here's our plan for the future. Okay, it's not going there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some evidence-based treatment that can easily be adapted for brain injury. The very first one on the list is cognitive behavioral therapy. I think for many people, it's a go-to therapy that is more easily adapted for people living with brain injury. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is it's often very structured. There's often a reliance on homework and written materials that can help a person remember information, keep track of things. There's a focus on concrete goals, a focus on problem solving, self-monitoring of behavior, self-monitoring of thoughts and feelings. And it can be adapted by increasing the repetition of information, taking smaller steps, and also, and very importantly, by adding booster sessions. A number of research studies have found that booster sessions for individuals living with brain injury can be very helpful. There's evidence for the use of CBT in addressing depression, anxiety, anger, problem solving, and self-efficacy. ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, is a kind of an offshoot or type of CBT that you may be very familiar with a focus on accepting your thoughts and feelings without judgment. And there's a focus on committing to activity goals, an emphasis on behavioral activation, getting scheduling activities that go along with your values and that keep you active and engaged. This can be adapted by adding more structure, more repetition to sessions, and adding consistent mindfulness exercises. Adapted ACT reduces psychological distress for those with chronic, moderate to severe TBI. And then there's supportive psychotherapy. I have to say, I think sometimes it's easy to direct our therapy for people with who may have cognitive deficits toward more behavioral modalities, and maybe not think as much about supportive psychotherapy. But research has shown us that supportive psychotherapy has reported significant improvements in agitation and irritability after brain injury. And one of the things that tells me is that perhaps some of that agitation and irritability comes from a person's need to be heard, to be listened to be able to discuss their feelings, their thoughts, and their grief about what they've gone through. So I just want to put in a plug for the importance of supportive psychotherapy. And then there's group therapy. Group therapy is my favorite modality, so it actually gets 2 slides today. There are psychoeducational groups, cognitive behavioral groups that have been developed for people living with brain injuries on coping skills, problem-solving skills, social competence, psychological well-being. One of the great things about these types of groups is they often have a manualized curriculum, a manual that each person in the group gets where they can look back and see what they did last week and what they're going to be doing next week. They can read ahead. They can look at their homework. They have a place to write notes and write things down. That also gives people a chance to take that notebook home and show it to the people in their life, their family or friends, and say, this is what I'm working on, and get some feedback and reinforcement for that work. There's usually a weekly review each week, going back and kind of cycling back and remembering what you worked on the week before. There's a focus on measurable, functional client goals. Many groups like this have scheduled breaks. I usually run groups for 90 minutes at a time with a 15-minute break in the middle. That break is really important. It allows people time for a brain break. They might just close their eyes and sit in a corner. They might get up and move around and stretch, get something to drink, but allows them to break their concentration, break their focus, and get a rest from that. The other adaptation that's important, I think, is small group size. I've never done a group over 8, and some groups as small as 2, really depending on the cognitive abilities of the people in the group. But I'd say the average group from 5 to 7. There's efficacy for addressing coping skills, problem-solving skills, and social competence in group therapy. And just a few words about group process. Even though many of these groups rely on cognitive behavioral strategies and psychoeducational formats, there's an importance for the group process that occurs, that group process that's been described by Irv Yalom and other group therapy gurus. He's really my guru. That group process is especially relevant, I think, for people living with brain injury. The sense of universality that can develop, that validation that, oh my gosh, I am not the only person dealing with this. I thought I was. I can't tell you how many times I've had people say that to me. People are more accepting of feedback that they get from other people who have lived their experience instead of people like me who don't know what it feels like to have a brain injury. I think that the best strategy for developing insight and self-awareness is definitely group therapy, hearing from other people. I can think of times when people have come into a group, the first session, and said, I don't know why I'm here. My wife told me I needed to come. I don't really have any problems. And as they listen to other people discuss the issues they're dealing with, you see a light bulb go off. And they say, you know, I think I have that problem too. I think I may be like you. There's also the sense of interpersonal learning that comes within the group process, the ability to learn more easily by watching other people, watching people's successes and interactions, and being able to practice in a supportive environment. The sense of altruism that develops within a group, the opportunity to say, hey, I just helped this other person. I gave them an insight that they appreciated. And then those existential factors can be worked on within the group process, exploring why me? Why did this injury happen to me? And what's the meaning of this new life after brain injury? There are also family interventions. There are many common issues that are faced by families after brain injury: grief and loss, anxiety and depression, and also an increased burden that's often felt that's sometimes accompanied by a feeling of guilt for feeling that burden. And as I mentioned earlier, there can be a realignment of roles and responsibilities. Suddenly, the person without the injury is doing things that the other person used to do, and that's added to their other responsibilities. They may not be out visiting with other couples like they used to because their loved one is not comfortable in those situations. So suddenly they don't have that emotional support that they got from their friends. The emotional, behavioral, and personality changes that happen have been found to be the most challenging for families after brain injury. They express a need for universality, just like the person with the brain injury does. That feeling of realizing that other families, other spouses, other children, other parents are dealing with these same issues and having these same feelings. And they have a need for support and a need for resources in the community. Multi-family support groups have been found to be very helpful. These are often offered through either brain injury associations or brain injury alliances. Every state in the United States has a brain injury association or alliance, and I'll talk more about those when we talk about resources. But it's a state organization that offers support groups, information, referral, education, and support. Providing families with education and awareness, providing family therapy and individual therapy for individual family members. Jeffrey Kreitzer and his team developed a brain injury family intervention and found that education, skill building, and psychological support for families can reduce burden. There are a couple of other modalities that I want to mention that I think are important to think about in your therapy. These are modalities that you might not usually use or think about, but they are focused on meaning and purpose in life. One is just helping the person with social engagement. Social connection and engagement positively affect that overall feeling of well-being for a person after brain injury. These sometimes are very lonely people. If they've lost their job, they've maybe lost a relationship, they may be spending a lot of time at home. How can you help them connect and engage back in the community, both within the community of other people who may be living the same experience, but also in the greater community? What can they be involved with at their community recreation center? Or can they take a class at their community college that can help them be out and about and around other people? And how can you help them engage in meaningful activity? We recently completed a study here at Craig and found that volunteering after brain injury increases life satisfaction and also a feeling of success in life. But we also found another thing. We found that volunteering after brain injury isn't always easy. It's something that a lot of people told us in the study that they wanted to do, but without help found difficult, because to volunteer, you often have to find a place to do it. You have to reach out and make an appointment. You have to go through a background check and show up for an orientation. And sometimes that can all feel overwhelming. So providing some support, assisting a person with that process, helping direct them, give them ideas for that can be very helpful. There are also organizations out there, and I've listed one here, Project Helping. Project Helping is an organization based in Colorado, but they're now in other parts of the country as well. You can look at their website. They have an interesting take on volunteering in that they will set up volunteer opportunities, group opportunities. So you can go to their calendar and say, well, I'm going to make sandwiches for the homeless on Tuesday. You can sign up for that. You don't have to do it every week and sign up for a long-term commitment. So it's an easy way to get started in volunteering, to volunteer without making a big commitment or going through a big process. I'm going to go through two case examples, and I'm hoping that these will give you a chance to see how some of these strategies could be helpful and or be useful in your work. The first is a 23-year-old male, 5 years post-traumatic brain injury from a snowboarding accident. Before his injury, he was a socially active high school student. He had a girlfriend. He was an athlete and had a scholarship to go to college out of state. When the injury occurred, it was a severe injury. He had persistent word finding problems, deficits in concentration, memory, and problem solving. He also had reduced initiation, found it hard to just get going. And he was very irritable, had a hard time regulating his emotions. He didn't finish high school. The injury happened his senior year, but his friends did. They moved on. They went to college. They went on with their lives. He's lonely. He lives in his grandparents' basement. He's socially isolated, dealing with anxiety, panic attacks, sleeps till noon, plays video games, and he frequently yells, slams doors, throws things. So what are some things that you might be able to apply to your treatment plan for this person? Well, here are a few suggestions. One is providing the patient and his family with education, with support, and with reassurance that some of these things are common after brain injury, that some of the issues he's dealing with or feelings that he's feeling have been felt by other people. Helping him and his grandparents keep daily emotion logs to increase his self-monitoring, his awareness of what are the things that trigger some of his emotions and what are his responses, and having his grandparents keep their own logs so that they can make some comparisons. Setting new realistic short-term behavioral goals. This guy is still wanting to go to college, still wanting to play football, and feeling very unsuccessful that he's not able to do those things. So helping him let go of some of those goals and set new goals that may find more success for him. Teaching relaxation and mindfulness exercises, using cognitive behavioral strategies to help him with his negative self-talk, have him set up a social activity log to see how little activity is going on in his week and how he may increase that step by step, helping him with structured problem-solving strategies. Having family sessions emphasizing some CBT strategies, and also looking at the family's communication, how they talk to each other, and providing homework assignments that they can work on together and remind each other about. Having him keep a list of his goals and strategies on his smartphone. He uses his phone for everything, so it's a good place for him to keep compensatory information. And also putting it on the family bulletin board, so every time he or his grandparents walk through the kitchen, they see that information and they're reminded. And having them have weekly family meetings at home to talk about progress and activities. I love family meetings. I think they're great for every family. A time to sit down on a regular basis at a regular time each week and look back at the week behind you, figure out, was it a good week? Was it not a good week? Were there things that happened that were great? I can't imagine what it must be like to look back and not remember whether you had a good week or a bad week. But I think that's sometimes the case for people living with brain injury. So having that family meeting gives people a chance to give feedback to each other, to say, hey, you know, you took out the garbage without me asking you to on Tuesday, and that's so helpful. And reminding him that he was successful. It also gives them a chance to look forward and say, what are we going to do this week? What are some activities we could do together? Referring this family to a TBI recreation group or a TBI meetup group. There are meetup groups that are online. Now, during the age of COVID, there are meetup groups that are happening for people all across the country. Referring him to a volunteer placement where he can be productive, find some meaningful activity, also have some social engagement. And perhaps referring him to a tutor or a speech language pathologist to help him prepare to get his GED. Speech pathologists in the community are often a great source to go to help a person with organizational skills, compensatory techniques, learning new information. The second case example is a 40-year-old male, 2 years post-TBI from a motor vehicle accident. Before his injury, he was a high school teacher, very gregarious and outgoing and social, very athletic, involved in sports. He was happily married, had 3 children. He had a moderate brain injury with some persistent problems with his memory and other cognitive skills, but he also had a very flat affect. It was difficult for him to show his emotions, and that was very frustrating to his family. Very low initiation, low endurance. He was unsuccessful in going back to work. He tried to go back to work. It didn't work out. He then tried tutoring for a while, and that didn't work as well. So he now was spending most of his time alone. His friends stopped calling. His family was very frustrated with the changes in his personality. His children were feeling very unappreciated and not listened to by him, feeling like he wasn't responsive to them. He often complained of being lonely and feeling depressed. So a few strategies that might be helpful for this person. Again, offering him and his family education about the injury, about how some of these issues may be not just him, but they're related to the injury itself, providing them with support and reassurance, referring them to their state brain injury association or alliance support group. Some support groups are now online. Some support groups are specifically for families, and some are for the person with the brain injury and the family. Providing them with family therapy to help them understand some of the emotional changes that have happened, and also to give him time to really explain how he's feeling to his family when it's so difficult for him to show it, and to do that in a supportive, helpful environment. And then to help the family grieve some of the losses that they're dealing with, to accept some of the changes that have happened to their life, and to develop some new goals, some new ways of doing things in the future, some new plans. Providing individual therapy with some CBT strategies, behavioral activation, some cognitive restructuring, referring them to, or him to, a TBI recreation group where he could get out of the house more on his own, do more activities, start to do some of the things that used to bring him pleasure. And referring the whole family perhaps to a volunteer opportunity, a place where his family could see him being active and productive and doing something meaningful and sharing that experience together. So a couple things to keep in mind, I think, about behavioral health and TBI. One is it's complex. There is a combination of factors that come together to lead to behavioral health problems. The neurological changes that occur, the psychosocial issues that come from that, and who this person was before, if they were dealing with depression or anxiety or other issues in their life. Helping them set up an environment that's successful for them. Providing consistency and repetition throughout your work, giving feedback and reinforcement that's concrete and straightforward and understandable to the person. Encouraging insight and awareness, and encouraging to find ways to monitor and be aware of their own behavior. And encouraging an existential meaning and purpose in life, helping them find activities and things to do that are purposeful and meaningful to them. And just a reminder that I'm sure we should remember to do this with all of our clients, but it's hard to really know what it feels like to live with a brain injury. It's not something we can see that easily. And I think it's important to remember that, that we can learn a lot from our clients. I know I have. And they can teach us a lot, listening to them, listening to their experiences and their insights about brain injury. These are a couple of important resources that I want to share. The first, and I'm going to try and click on a couple of these, we'll see if they pop up. The first is the TBI Model Systems Knowledge Translation Center. The TBI Model Systems is a group of 16 research centers across the country that work on research in brain injury, provide education, and this website is their translation center for providing that information both to clinicians and also to families and people living with brain injury. They have basically every topic that you can imagine, and you can click on one of these topics and gain more information. For example, TBI and depression. If you click on this, you can find fact sheets that are downloadable, so you can actually print them out. You can read about hot topics that are current about TBI and depression. You can watch a slideshow, download a video, very informative. And they also have current information about current research in TBI. I'm hoping this will let me go back. Oh, uh-oh. Uh-oh. Shoot. I hope you can, let's see. I'm hoping that I can regain that. Can somebody send me a chat and tell me you can see me? I hope that you can. The next resource is the Brain Injury Association of America. And let's see, I think somebody sent. Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure I came back. The Brain Injury Association of America is really the oldest and biggest advocacy, information, and education resource about brain injury in the United States. It's a great website. They offer not only education and information, but they offer the latest statistics and data. And they also have a bookstore where you can find books, webinars, textbooks. You can find books that have been written by people living with brain injury. And I think it's a very useful resource, both for people living with brain injury and also for clinicians. The Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado is an example of one brain injury, a local statewide association or alliance. Again, some of them are alliances and some are associations. They offer classes, they offer information and referral. They also help people find resources in the community. BrainLine is another website that offers education and information really focused on people living with brain injury and their families and helping them meet their needs. There are blogs and information. And then the CDC also has information on traumatic brain injury. They have the latest data and statistics. These are three key references in terms of books on psychotherapy and brain injury that I often fall back to and recommend. There are certainly other references out there. And this is my email address. And this is the view from the trail behind my house. So if you have questions, if you could put them in the Q&A, I'm going to open that up. Are there specific apps that you recommend? Yes, there are some apps out there that I know of. I'm sure there may be some others. You may find some of those apps on the website for BIA, the Brain Injury Association of America. One of the best apps that I know of is done by a nonprofit called BEST. And I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but when I send out the link with the recording, I will send a link to the BEST website, making myself a note on that. One of the great things about the BEST app is that they also offer training on how to use their app, and it has things developed specifically for people living with brain injuries, such as a way of monitoring your fatigue level so that if you've put too much into your daily schedule, it'll alert you. Can we get access to the recording? Yes. I will send out a link to the recording. It'll also be posted on the website for the webinar series. How would you recommend a therapist use online therapy for clients? I think that's a really good question, and I know it's a difficult thing right now. My husband is a therapist in private practice, and all his therapy right now is online. I know that the therapy groups that I'm doing I've been putting online. I've been surprised at how well those have gone. One of the things that I think is helpful for people living with brain injury is to send them information ahead of time. So for example, I was doing a self-advocacy group recently for people living with brain injury, and I sent them the workbook ahead of time so they had that in front of them to look at. I kept the group size small, and we limited the number of sessions. Other questions? Let's see. I've seen a pattern of TBI patients getting caught in the video game trap, spending a lot of time on, and this seems to correlate with anger issues. Do you find that true as well? Yes, I do. And as I mentioned, my husband's a therapist. He specializes in children and adolescents and finds that even with adolescents who are not living with a brain injury, I think that using some of those behavioral activation strategies, helping people find other activities to do that may be focused on their values and helping them look at what their long-term goals are, and associating the activities they do today with those long-term goals can be helpful. But yes, I do think that that's a problem. Other questions? I think, let me look at the chat here, there might be. Okay, I don't see any questions there either. So if anyone, let's see, that's not another question. Okay. If anyone has questions, feel free to contact me. And again, I will be, oh, here's one more question. As a therapist living with a TBI sister, we are older. She won't accept my help because she tells me to stop using on her. Please advise. Well, I think that's a very difficult question. I do think that it can be difficult to help the people that you love the most and that you're closest to in a professional way, and I think it can be difficult for them to accept that. I guess the first thing I would think of is trying to funnel that help through someone outside of yourself. I also would recommend that, perhaps she's someone who might benefit from a group therapy situation where she can be around other people who are having similar problems and help her talk about those issues, look for solutions to those issues with people who are dealing with the same thing. Or so she can see that they are actually people who understand what that's like. And let me see if there's another question here. Oh, somebody found it. Bestconnections.org. Is that the app developer website? Yes, it is. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. The person who started that organization is Michelle Wild. And Michelle is also an instructor at Coastline Community College in California. They have a very interesting community college program for people living with brain injury. It might be also worth taking a look at that at her college program, but she uses that application with her students in her classes as well. I think it's very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Let me take a peek at the time, and we have a few more minutes. So let's see, any other questions? How long after injury do you find people respond best to psychotherapy? That's a very good question. What I've found is that, for example, in some of the groups I do social skills groups, and I also work with people on self-advocacy groups. And I find that people need to return to their life and experience life after brain injury outside of the supportive cocoon of brain injury rehabilitation, to gain some insight and awareness as to what it may really be like out there, what kinds of issues they may really be coming upon after their brain injury. So I think that it may not be as long as the person has been since their injury, but also the length of time that they've been out of inpatient rehabilitation. So at least 6 to 9 months might be the most helpful. I know that some people can benefit earlier than that, but I do think that there are people who may feel they don't need services until that period of time has been that they've been out in the community, they've experienced some failures in their life, some challenges, and may have a clear understanding that things may be different now than they were before. So I've had some people come back after attempting to go back to work and finding that they thought they were able to return to their job, but ran into difficulties and weren't able to maintain their employment, and are then wanting to come back and look at some of those issues. How might you help a client work toward realigning goals related toward accepting TBI when in therapy they talk about not wanting to hear that they can no longer reach previous levels of functioning? I think that we can't really tell them what they can or can't do. I think we can help them find ways of trying it out themselves. Again, I think being able to get feedback from other people with lived experiences is a really good strategy, even if it's one other person. Even if you're, even if you've only got one client in your caseload living with brain injury, if there's someone from the Brain Injury Alliance who might be willing to sit down and have coffee with that person or spend some time with them, and kind of buddy up with them and talk to them about goals, about their own life and how they may have changed their goals. I think it's a lot easier to listen to and easier to hear. Also asking that person to set some goals and then try to keep track of their behaviors and their progress. Instead of pointing out that they aren't being successful, just having them look at the data that they're gathering and evaluate that, and letting them come to that conclusion themselves. Next question is the loss of meaning and purpose a cognitive symptom or more likely due to the trauma? I think it comes from multiple sources. I think that if I put myself in the place of someone living with a brain injury, if I had lost my job, if I had perhaps lost some friendships, there are certainly those psychosocial factors that can help reduce a person's sense of meaning and purpose in life. Not being able to do the things that you were able to do before, not being able to engage in some of the activities that you did before. I think there's also a sense of awareness that that ability to be aware of our own progress and abilities is certainly a cognitive skill, but there are also those psychosocial factors and emotional factors. Are there any additional modifications to keep in mind for a person who has impairments in self-awareness and cognition pre-injury? I think what you're saying is, was this a person who had some cognitive problems and problems with awareness before their injury? I have worked with some people with learning disabilities before their injury, and I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, but certainly finding that you may have to even increase the structure and repetition and consistency of information even more. What can lawyers or advocates do better for brain injured clients? Common mistakes or frustrations that you see? I think one thing that lawyers or advocates can do is to make sure that the person themselves is expressing their wishes and their goals, and that they develop some of the skills of self-advocacy, so that instead of someone advocating for them, They can be a partner in that advocacy. I found that helping a person look at their own self-care, look at their own wellness, is a place to start with self-advocacy, because if you're not feeling well emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually, it's difficult to go out and advocate for yourself. So having them kind of assess their own, where they're at right now, and take care of themselves in good ways, and then helping them gain information and resources, so that not only you as their advocate have that, but they understand that information as well. Helping them learn ways to organize and find that information, and then helping them learn assertive communication skills. How can someone get connected to your group you host? Um, I think you may be talking about the self-advocacy group or the social skills group that I do, and feel free to reach out to my email and contact me about that. Let me just check to see if there's any more chats up here. Um, the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado has a resource navigation program and a self-management program. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for taking part today. Feel free to reach out to me. I will be sending an email through the Zoom system that will give you the link for the survey to give you a certificate. We hope that you'll take part in our upcoming webinars. Next month, Dr. Arsenagas will be speaking on cognitive issues. And I know I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you very much, and hope everyone has a great day.